have what you were supposed to want, the job, or something close to it, the relationship, or something workable, the apartment, the routine, the version of stability that you were told would feel like arriving somewhere, and you're sitting in the middle of it, and something is missing. Not dramatically, not in a way you could point to and say, "This is wrong, this is the problem. Fix this," and the emptiness goes away. Just a quiet, persistent, hard-to-justify sense that something isn't quite there. A flatness underneath the things that are supposedly working. And the hardest part is that you can't really complain about it. Because what would you say? My life is good and I feel empty? It sounds ungrateful even inside your own head, so you don't say it. You keep going. You assume it'll pass, or that you're just tired, or that you need a vacation, or that everyone feels this way and you're just noticing it more than most people do. But it doesn't pass. Not really. It just becomes the quiet background hum of an otherwise functional life. I want to tell you something that might be hard to hear at first, but that I think is actually the most important thing in this whole conversation. The emptiness is not a malfunction. It's not a sign that something is broken in you. It's not depression in the clinical sense, though it can look similar from the outside. It's not ingratitude, even though it might feel that way. It's information, very specific, very precise information about something that's missing from the actual texture of your life. Not the version of your life that looks good from outside, but the version you're actually inhabiting hour by hour, day by day. And the information is this: a part of you isn't in this life. Not all of you showed up to build it, and the part that's missing is letting you know. Here's how this usually happens. Somewhere along the way, you started making decisions based on what made sense, what was reasonable, what other people would understand and approve of, the career path that fit your skills and the market's needs, even if it wasn't quite what lit you up. The city you live in because that's where the opportunities were, or where the people you knew already were, or where things felt manageable. The relationship that worked on paper, good values, compatible lifestyles, genuine affection, even if some part of you wondered quietly whether it had the specific depth you actually craved. None of these were bad decisions. Most of them were probably the right decisions, given the information you had and the constraints you were working within. But each one was built primarily from the outside in, from what made sense, from what was achievable, sustainable, defensible, and less from the inside out, from what you actually wanted, from what made you feel, in some specific and hard-to-fake way, alive. Over enough years, a life built mostly from the outside in starts to feel like exactly what it is. A structure that's sound but not quite inhabited. A house that's well built but where you live in only 2 of the rooms. The emptiness is the feeling of all the unused rooms. I want to be careful here, because this can sound like I'm telling you to blow up your life. That's not what I'm saying. The emptiness isn't necessarily telling you to quit your job or leave your relationship or move to a different country. Sometimes it is, but usually it's pointing at something much more specific and much less dramatic than a total life overhaul. It's pointing at the particular things that have gone quiet inside the life you're already living, the creative impulse that used to be part of how you moved through the world, that you stopped making room for because it didn't seem productive enough to justify the time. The kind of connection you actually crave, not surface friendliness, but real depth, real honesty, real mutual seeing that you've stopped pursuing because it's easier to stay at the comfortable surface with most people. The sense of purpose that comes from feeling like what you do matters, specifically because you're the one doing it, as opposed to the sense that you're filling a role that could be filled by almost anyone. The physical aliveness, actual movement, actual presence in your body that gets replaced by sitting, scrolling, managing. These things don't always require a dramatic change to address. They require attention, time, the willingness to take them seriously instead of treating them as luxuries you'll get to eventually. Let me say something about gratitude, because it comes up immediately whenever this topic does. People feel guilty about the emptiness because they think gratitude and emptiness can't coexist. Like if you're genuinely grateful for what you have, you shouldn't also feel something is missing. That's not true. And the insistence on it is part of why so many people stay stuck, quietly suffering, telling themselves they have no right to feel what they're feeling. You can be deeply grateful for your life and still feel that something essential is absent from it. These aren't contradictions. They're just two different things happening at once. Gratitude is about recognizing the value of what you have. The emptiness is about recognizing the absence of something specific, something that gratitude for other things doesn't fill, because it's not a general gratitude deficiency. It's a specific absence. You can be grateful for your health and still feel the absence of creative expression. You can be grateful for your relationship and still feel the absence of being truly known. You can be grateful for your financial stability and still feel the absence of work that feels meaningful rather than just necessary. These coexist constantly, and treating the emptiness as a failure of gratitude just adds shame on top of something that's already difficult to sit with. This is the conversation most people are too afraid to have, honestly. If it's reaching you, subscribe. We go here every week. Here's what doesn't work, because I think it's important to name this clearly. More achievement doesn't fix it. If the emptiness were caused by insufficient accomplishment, then accomplishing more would fix it. But for most people who feel this way, they've already tried that. They got the next promotion, hit the next goal, achieved the next thing that was supposed to finally feel like enough. And the emptiness was still there. Sometimes worse, because now there's also the disorientation of having done the thing you thought would fix it and discovering it didn't. This is one of the most painful experiences available to a high-functioning person. Doing everything right, achieving everything you were told to achieve, and still feeling the same quiet hum underneath all of it. It doesn't mean you're broken. It means the achievement was never actually addressing the source of the emptiness. It was addressing something else: security, status, the approval of people whose opinion mattered to you. Important things, but not the thing the emptiness is actually about. More simplifying doesn't fix it either, at least not by itself. The popular advice, declutter, minimize, simplify, can be genuinely useful. Removing excess noise from your life can make it easier to hear what's actually going on underneath. But simplifying isn't the same as filling the absence. It just creates quieter conditions in which the absence becomes more noticeable, which is useful as a diagnostic step. But it's not the cure. People sometimes simplify their entire lives and still feel the same emptiness, just with fewer things around to distract them from it. So what actually does help? I want to give you something specific, not a vague suggestion to find your passion or follow your bliss. Phrases that sound nice and mean almost nothing practically. Something concrete. The first thing is to actually ask the question honestly: what makes me feel alive? Not what should make you feel alive. Not what would look good if you said it out loud at a dinner party. Not what would be impressive or practical or easily monetized. What actually, when you do it, produces the feeling of being present and engaged and genuinely yourself, the opposite of the flatness. For most people, the honest answer to this question is uncomfortable in its smallness. It's not a grand life purpose, it's something modest. A specific kind of conversation, a specific creative act, a specific physical activity, a specific quality of time spent with specific people. And here's the key thing. Most people, once they identify the honest answer, immediately start explaining why it's not realistic to build a life around it. I'm not asking you to build a life around it. I'm asking you to let it back into your life, in whatever small amount is actually available to you. The second thing is to actually test it. Don't just identify the thing that makes you feel alive and then file it away as an interesting insight. Put it into an actual week, not as a grand commitment, as an experiment. One afternoon, one evening, 1 hour, protected, where you do the thing that you identified, without justifying it, without making it productive, without converting it into content or a side hustle, or anything that requires it to prove its value. Just do it because it's the thing that makes you feel alive. And then notice, actually notice, pay attention to what happens in the texture of the day that contains that hour versus the days that don't. This is more powerful than it sounds because the comparison gives you real, lived evidence about what's actually missing. Not theoretical evidence, felt evidence, the difference between a day with the thing in it and a day without. That evidence is the most reliable guide you have for what needs to change and how much. I want to talk about something specific that comes up again and again when people examine their emptiness honestly. It's almost always relational, not always romantic, but almost always about the quality of connection in their life. Because here's something that's easy to miss when you're busy building a functional life. You can have many relationships and still be profoundly underconnected. You can have a partner, a family, a wide circle of friends, colleagues who like you, and still feel that almost none of it goes to the depth you actually crave. Most relationships, even good ones, operate at a certain surface, pleasant, functional, mutually respectful, but not necessarily deep. Not necessarily the kind where you say the actual thing you're thinking, where you're met with equal honesty, where the conversation goes somewhere that changes both people a little. That depth is rare. It requires risk on both sides. It requires people willing to be more honest than is comfortable. And if your life is full of surface connection and empty of depth connection, the emptiness you feel might be exactly that. Not a lack of people, a lack of being truly known by any of them. This is worth examining directly. Who in your life do you actually let see you? Not the capable, managed version, the real one, with the doubts and the fears and the things you don't usually say out loud. If the honest answer is no one, or almost no one, that's important information. Because the emptiness might not be asking you to find a new purpose. It might be asking you to let someone in. Let me say something about fear, because it's usually underneath the inaction. Most people who feel this kind of emptiness know, on some level, what's missing. They have a decent idea of what would help, the creative thing they've been avoiding, the depth of connection they've been settling for less than, the direction they suspect is theirs but haven't pursued. The reason they don't move toward it isn't confusion. It's fear. Fear that pursuing the thing that makes them feel alive will cost them something they're not willing to lose. Stability, approval, the life they've built that, while not fully satisfying, is at least secure. Fear that the depth of connection they're craving, if they actually pursued it, would require a vulnerability that feels too exposed. Fear that the direction they suspect is theirs isn't actually viable, that it's naive or impractical or evidence of immaturity rather than genuine insight. These fears are usually larger in the imagination than in the actual experience of testing them. This is something I've seen consistently. The thing people are most afraid will happen if they move toward what they actually want is rarely what actually happens, and not because nothing changes. Things do change. But the catastrophic version, the complete collapse, the total loss, the proof that they were foolish to want something different, that version almost never arrives. What usually arrives is something more manageable, a small disruption, a short period of discomfort, a conversation that's hard but survivable. And on the other side of that discomfort, more often than not, is exactly the thing the emptiness was pointing toward. I want to talk about time because it matters in this conversation more than people usually acknowledge. The emptiness doesn't resolve through insight alone. You can understand everything I've said here, nod along, recognize yourself completely in it, and still wake up tomorrow in the same structure, doing the same things, feeling the same flatness. Because understanding doesn't redistribute your hours, only choices do. If your week is currently built almost entirely around obligation, around the things that have to happen, around the management of a life that's mostly external, then understanding that something's missing doesn't change the week. You have to actually change the week. Move the hours, protect the time, make the small, repeated, unglamorous choices that shift the balance even slightly. This is slower than people want it to be. There's a desire, when you finally name what's missing, to fix it immediately, to overhaul everything at once. But the emptiness wasn't built in a week, and it doesn't resolve in one either. It resolves the way most real things resolve, through small, consistent redirection. 1 hour reclaimed this week, one honest conversation this month, one creative act protected from the demands that usually consume it. These accumulate, slowly, quietly, without the dramatic arc of a transformation story, but they accumulate into something real, a life that has more of you in it than it used to. Here's what I want to say to the people who feel like they've already tried everything, who have done the self-help, read the books, gone to therapy, tried the meditation, attempted the life redesign, and the flatness is still there, somewhere underneath everything. I don't think you failed. I think the work of addressing this isn't a one-time intervention. It's an ongoing relationship with your own honesty. The emptiness isn't a problem you solve once. It's a signal that needs to be checked in with regularly, like a relationship that requires ongoing attention rather than a single conversation that fixes everything forever. Some periods of life will have more of you in them. Some will have less, because circumstances demand more from the external and less time is available for the internal. The goal isn't to permanently eliminate the emptiness. It's to develop a habit of noticing it, taking it seriously, and making small corrections in its direction whenever you have the chance. That's not failure. That's just what it looks like to live a life that's actually being paid attention to. Let me talk about something specific that happens to ambitious people. The ones who built their lives around achievement, who set a goal, hit it, set a bigger one, hit that too, who have a track record of success that most people would envy. These are often the people who feel this emptiness most acutely, and it confuses them more than almost anyone because their entire strategy for solving problems has always been to work harder, achieve more, push further, and that strategy has worked for everything else in their life, except this. Because the emptiness isn't a performance gap. It's not something you can out-achieve. You can't earn your way to feeling alive the same way you earned your way to a promotion. The achievement-oriented mind tries anyway. It sets a new goal, a new relationship milestone, a new financial target, a new fitness benchmark, anything that can be measured and pursued and eventually hit. And the hitting feels good for a moment. There's a genuine satisfaction in achievement, but it's a different kind of satisfaction than the one the emptiness is asking for. It's the satisfaction of having done something, not the satisfaction of having been someone fully in the doing. The distinction matters. Doing something well and being present while you do it are not the same experience. You can do something extremely well while being almost entirely absent from the experience of doing it, operating on autopilot, executing a plan, performing a role you've performed many times before. The emptiness, for high achievers specifically, is often pointing at this gap, not at insufficient achievement, at insufficient presence inside the achievement. The question isn't what else should I accomplish, it's how present am I while I'm accomplishing the things I'm already doing? That's a different kind of work, less visible, harder to put on a resume, but it's usually closer to what's actually missing. I want to talk about boredom because I think it's misunderstood in this context. A lot of people experience the emptiness as a kind of low-grade boredom, not acute boredom, not the obvious restlessness of having nothing to do, a subtler version, the sense that even when things are happening, even when the calendar is full, there's a flatness underneath the activity. Our culture treats boredom as something to be immediately solved. The moment there's a gap, we fill it. With the phone, with another task, with anything that prevents the gap from being fully felt. But boredom, when you actually let yourself feel it instead of immediately escaping it, often has something to say. It's frequently the first sign of the emptiness becoming conscious. The moment when the autopilot stops being able to fully numb you to what's missing. If you can tolerate the boredom instead of immediately filling it, if you can sit with the discomfort of having nothing to distract you from the underlying flatness, sometimes something becomes clear that the constant filling was preventing you from ever noticing. what you actually want, what you've been avoiding wanting because wanting it would require something uncomfortable. The boredom is not a problem to be solved with more stimulation. It's often a doorway to exactly the information you've been trying not to access. Here's something about identity that's worth examining. A lot of the emptiness comes from a mismatch between the identity you've built and the identity that's actually yours. Not your personality in some fixed sense. The version of yourself that you present, that you've organized your choices around, that other people know you as. If that identity was built primarily in response to what was expected, what your family valued, what your culture rewarded, what seemed practical and achievable given your circumstances, it can be a very functional identity and still not be a particularly accurate one. You can be very good at being the identity you built, capable, respected, successful by its own internal standards, and still feel the specific hollowness of performing a role that isn't quite you, even when you perform it well. This is different from simply not having achieved enough within that identity. It's a mismatch at a more fundamental level. The identity itself, however successfully inhabited, isn't the right container. Recognizing this is uncomfortable because it suggests that some of what you've built, not all of it, but some, might need to be revised, not necessarily abandoned, but examined honestly for whether it's actually yours or whether it's a very competent performance of something assigned to you a long time ago. That examination is hard. It's much easier to ask, what else should I add to this identity, than, is this fundamentally the right identity at all? But the second question is often the one the emptiness is actually asking. Let me say something about the specific moment this usually surfaces. It's rarely during a crisis. Crises generate their own intensity, their own urgency, their own clear sense of what needs to be addressed. The emptiness usually surfaces in stillness. In the quiet evening, in the unstructured weekend afternoon, in the moment right before sleep, when the busyness of the day has finally stopped and there's nothing left to manage. This is important because it means the emptiness isn't really about a lack of activity. It's about what's revealed when the activity stops. A lot of people, without realizing it, structure their lives to minimize these moments of stillness. They fill every gap. They keep the noise going. Not because they consciously want to avoid the emptiness, but because stillness is where it becomes audible, and audible is uncomfortable. If you notice that you have an unusually strong aversion to unstructured time, that you feel a pull to fill every gap with something, anything, that aversion is worth examining. It might be less about productivity and more about avoidance. The emptiness doesn't go away because you avoid the moments where you'd notice it. It just becomes a permanent low hum instead of an occasional, addressable signal. Letting yourself have more stillness, even though it's uncomfortable, even though the first response to it might be exactly the flatness you've been avoiding, is one of the more direct ways to actually hear what the emptiness has been trying to say. There's one more thing worth saying about the people who love you and might be confused by this. If you start to make small changes, protecting an hour for something that makes you feel alive, having a more honest conversation than usual, stepping back slightly from an identity you've outgrown, some people in your life might not understand it. They got used to the version of you that fits neatly into the life you've already built. That version was reliable, predictable, easy to plan around. When you start, even gently, to bring more of your actual self into the life, when the emptiness starts to be addressed rather than managed, there can be a period of adjustment for you and for them. This isn't a reason to stop. It's just something to expect. The people who genuinely care about you will, in most cases, adjust. They'll be glad to see more of you show up, even if it requires some recalibration. The relationship might actually get better, not worse, because what's showing up is more real. The relationships that can't tolerate any change in you at all, those are worth noticing too. Not necessarily as relationships to end, but as relationships where the dynamic has perhaps depended a little too much on you staying exactly as you've been. Either way, the discomfort of this transition is temporary. and it's considerably smaller than the cost of continuing to live with the flatness indefinitely because addressing it might inconvenience someone else's expectations. You're allowed to take up more space in your own life, even if it requires some adjustment from people who are used to the smaller version. I want to talk about comparison because it makes this whole experience worse in a specific way. When you feel empty in the middle of a life that looks fine from outside, the natural move is to look around, to check whether other people seem to feel this way too, or whether it's just you. And what you usually see, at least on the surface, at least in the curated versions of other people's lives that are most visible to you, is people who seem fine, who seem fulfilled, who post the version of their life that looks complete and satisfied. This makes the emptiness feel more isolating, like you're the only one experiencing the gap between how things look and how they feel. You're not. This feeling is extraordinarily common. It might be one of the most common psychological experiences of people living in relatively privileged, relatively stable circumstances in the modern world. The gap between external success and internal aliveness is so widespread that there's an entire body of research on it. But almost nobody talks about it honestly, because admitting it feels like admitting failure or ingratitude or some flaw that other people, the ones who seem genuinely fine, don't have. Most of those other people are not actually fine in the way they appear to be. Some of them are exactly where you are, performing the same exterior of contentment while feeling the same quiet hum underneath. Some of them haven't even let themselves notice the gap yet, which isn't the same as not having it. The point isn't to feel better through misery being shared equally. The point is to stop treating your own experience as evidence of some unique deficiency. It's not unique, it's common. It's almost the default condition of a life built mostly around external markers of success in a culture that doesn't teach anyone how to also build the internal ones. You're not failing at something everyone else figured out. You're encountering something most people are also quietly encountering, usually alone, usually without language for it, usually assuming they're the only one. Naming it out loud, even just to yourself, already puts you ahead of where most people get to. Let me say one more thing about what actually constitutes a fix here, because I think there's a temptation, after a conversation like this one, to look for the solution, the thing you do that makes the emptiness go away permanently. I don't think that's how this works. I think the emptiness is less like an illness to be cured and more like a relationship to be maintained. The relationship between the life you're building externally and the life that's actually happening inside you. That relationship needs ongoing attention, not a single fix, a continuous, gentle, recurring check-in. Am I making room for what makes me feel alive? Or has the external structure taken over completely again? Am I connecting with real depth somewhere in my life? Or has everything drifted back to comfortable surface? Am I present in what I'm doing, or am I operating on autopilot through another stretch of accomplishment that isn't being felt? These questions don't have permanent answers. The answer shifts depending on what season of life you're in, what demands are currently pulling at you, how much space you've protected recently for the internal side of things. The goal isn't to answer these questions once and be done. It's to keep asking them, regularly, honestly, without immediately needing the answer to be reassuring. That ongoing honesty, more than any single life change, is what actually keeps the emptiness from accumulating into something larger and more entrenched. It's not glamorous. It doesn't make for a dramatic before and after story, but it's real. And it works in a way that one-time fixes never quite do. I want to close with something simple. You're not broken because your life looks good on paper and still feels empty in places. That gap is one of the most common and most under-discussed experiences available to a person living in a culture that measures success by external markers. The emptiness isn't punishing you. It's not evidence that you don't deserve what you have or that you're incapable of being satisfied. It's the most honest part of you trying to get your attention, telling you patiently and persistently that some part of your actual life, the part that makes you specifically you, not a generic version of a successful person, has been left out of the structure you built. And it's not too late to let it back in. Not all at once, not by blowing anything up, just by starting to notice what makes you feel alive and giving it slightly more room than you've been giving it. This week, not eventually. This week. One more thought before the comments. If you're not sure where to start with the smallest version of the question. Not what is my purpose or what should I do with my life? Those questions are too big and they tend to produce paralysis rather than movement. Start smaller. What's 1 hour this week that could belong to something real, something that's actually yours, instead of something that's just expected? That's a question you can actually answer, and answering it, then actually doing the thing even once, is worth more than weeks spent trying to figure out the big picture. The big picture tends to clarify itself through small actions, not the other way around. So don't wait until you know exactly what's missing in some complete, articulate way. Just take the next small step toward feeling more present in the life you're already living. That's enough to start. That's genuinely enough. For the comments, what's the thing that makes you feel most alive that you've stopped making time for? Name it. Just naming it is the first step toward giving it room again. I'll see you in the next one.